required to take the vaccine, it seems as though it's not doing anything. They're saying, oh yeah, you also have to keep wearing a mask. You also have to still socially distance, and you still might be able to spread it. And also, you're probably not that risk of dying from it anyways, but we want you to get it anyways. It seems
Well, yeah, it's really scary when you think about it, though, Adrian. When you think about what red line was for the Pope's visit there in the first place was an increase of COVID-related illnesses in Iraq. And that was one of the questions that were asked to the press office on the Wednesday prior to the Pope leaving on that Friday last week, was since there has been an increase, a pretty drastic increase in Iraq, why the Pope was still going. And the press office said, look, we're taking all precautions. One of the big precautions is making sure everybody is going to be inoculated. And, you know, it's interesting because Colin Flynn, when he received his first dose, he said he felt okay. I mean, he had a sore arm, but that's it. And that's one of the things that people have discussed is that they have the sore arm. And then he said he was really sick, very sick for a few days with a fever after he received a second dose. So is it a cost-benefit analysis? I mean, everybody, you know, who received it. There were, you know, differing reports, but I just found it really interesting, especially because some of the concerns that the press had was, you know, a lot of people are going to be gathering in these large groups with COVID in the rise. Was it really an ideal situation? But Adrian, I mean, we saw the results. We saw this amazing meeting, interreligious dialogue, as you can say it, firsthand with the Grand Mufti there in Rome, and not in Rome, in Iraq. There we go. See in my mind. But we see him meeting the Pope. We saw some video out for the first time. Adrian, what were your thoughts on that? Seeing him meeting this Shia cleric.
Yes, I am slightly skeptical. I always try to wait when all these things happen, a good week before everything happens, and let people like Bree Dail sift through all the information and get back. Because when I see it, I'm like, well, and first look, it seems like everything is going really well, but then things start coming out, and I hate to be disappointed again and again and again. So I usually wait a little bit before forming an opinion. But first look, everything seems to be dandy and really wonderful. So,
yeah, on the political side, it's actually, you know, if we were just to take away the religious aspect, which is kind of very difficult since we have a sovereign state of, you know, the Vatican, but also the head of the Church of Rome. You know, it's hard to separate that, but on a political side, it looked to be very successful. Here we have two heads of religion getting together and holding hands and really communicating face to face. That's very interesting, you know, and my mind harkens back to the story of Saint Francis going and speaking to in the Middle East, you know, wanting to die, actually going to the Middle East seeking martyrdom, and yet here he is trying to convert, you know, Muslims. And what was really interesting about Saint Francis and the story, which differs here, is that Francis was going to convert and to have a conversation about Christ. And one of the things that were marked in many of the reports on this meeting was there weren't too many conversations from the Pope's side on Christ being the source and summit. And that's one of the real concerns that a lot of people have. But I think we have to take a look at the fullness of the actions that were there. You know, and one of the things that I find very interesting, Adrian, is the fact that Colin Flynn interviewed a young woman who at age 12 had to escape Mosul because of ISIS. And she ended up becoming, you know, the top of her class. And we talked about this last week. But what I find very interesting is that when he asked her, what is this going to do to the Iraqi people, the Christians in Iraq? Adrian, her response was really forthright. She said, it's a great gathering and people are going to be really happy to see him. And it is an honor. But when he leaves, it's not really going to change too many people's mind, especially the Christians who've left Iraq to return to Iraq. And she said, and things are going to go back the way they were. And that actually, Adrian, is very much the same response that I was given by the Yazidi leaders, that they were afraid that even though there's going to be a spotlight, nothing is going to happen, and it will just give more more onerous for those who are of bad will, which we know ISIS is one that has regrouped, but there are others, to come in and really attack during this time. So what are your thoughts on that, Adrian?
Yes, it's kind of what I was fearing. I hadn't seen that, but now that you say it, it's kind of exactly what I was fearing and why I was a little skeptical initially to comment on it, because I was thinking, how are things going to result in the long run? Initially, whenever the media reports come out on it, it seems like everything is positive. But my fear was that it would be not like Holy Father Francis. And it's kind of funny. Whenever I was a Dominican friar, we would refer to Saint Francis of Assisi as Holy Father Francis, and Saint Dominic as Holy Father Dominic. So it's kind of confusing saying Holy Father Francis and then also Holy Father Francis as two different people. But whenever we talk about Saint Francis, you see St. Francis going out, and like you said, he wanted to die. He wanted to be a martyr. He was there to convert the Sultan, and with such heroic vigor. And he brought the Station of the Cross back from the east into the west. And this is very important. But we see here, like you were saying here, the fact that these people recognize that whenever he leaves, things will just go back to the status quo, that there was no fundamental change in the way things were done. That's incredibly
And a young
concerning.
woman saying that too, right?
Absolutely. And it's not like it's someone who is disconnected. It's someone who's in the heart of the issue, that is part of the people who are engaged in everything going on. That's very important. It's very telling.
Yes, and this goes into this whole idea of authority, which is kind of our theme for today. For those of you just joining us, we're going to be talking about authority in next segment with Dr. Jan Benz. He just recently gave a conference on the breakdown on authority, and I think that's really an important point here, because we have the authority of the church. We know that we've got the source and summit. And when we see that is kind of swept aside, and there was an interview, I'm trying to remember if it was on EWTN as well. I think it was on EWTN News Nightly, with an expert in diplomacy saying, look, it's good and it's just to have dialogue, but there is a point and a red line that one must say, especially as a leader, to say, stop killing our people. And you can't have dialogue with people who don't know that there is a red line, that dialogue will end and action will begin to protect. And with, especially within the Middle Eastern culture, that red line has to be very clear. And I'm not sure yet, based off of his speeches and his sermons, if that was really well delivered. Although I do have to say, his homily that he gave in the cathedral at St. Joseph's, and I put it up on my Twitter feed, I think it was really well done. I did see some people come back and say that they were upset that he didn't say more, or that it didn't have substance, it lacked substance. But I think those people have become a little jaded and are trying to look many times for things that are being said underneath the waters, and maybe that's an important thing. But like you, Adrian, I think you are right to say, I stand back and I watch and I wait for analysis, and analysis in a way that is fair and balanced. And I think in this case, I think it was a successful trip, and we have to applaud him. Historic. One of the first popes they will say that he is the first pope to step into Iraq, but I would question that. I would question that just for the fact that early church came from Iraq, so.
Right. Maybe it might be better to say the first modern pope.
Modern pope, right. Because I'm not sure if we can say that Peter wasn't there,
Right.
In some of the early popes. But, this goes into, again, authority, right? And so another story that came out this week was that an American cardinal has been placed in a really strong position of authority here in the Vatican. The Council of Bishops is what permits the Pope, or not rather permits, but advises the Pope on his choices of bishops. And so one American is already on there, and that would be Cardinal Cupich of Chicago. And, it's interesting because he was here last month, and there are conversations to be had about that, because why was he here? It looks like potentially he, from the whispers in Logia, we are hearing that he's potentially going to end up being the head of this dicastery. So it's very interesting that we end up seeing another cardinal who's had some issues in the past, Cardinal Tobin of New Jersey. Some people remember him from tweeting out "Nighty Night Baby, I love you." So I'm sure that this is a way to potentially put him back into areas of showing himself as authoritative. We'll have to see, Adrian. And then finally, we'll discuss last hour, because I think this is something that we'll have to circle back to. Adrian, is the the report coming out of the Washington Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. This impacts both secular as well as Catholic individuals, because it has to deal with tithing. And we know we've had some major issues in the recent past on financial tithing. So when we get back, though, I'm going to have Dr. Jan Benz on. I'm so excited to have him here to discuss authority and the breakdown on authority. So when we're back, we look forward to having Dr. Jan Benz here from Rome. And Adrian, anything else?
No, I think that's really good. And we talked a lot about this kind of thing on our show, the Catholic Drive Time show, in regards to Cardinal Supich and his things going on in the Chicago Archdiocese. I think it's very important, but yeah, a lot of crazy things going on.
Yeah, a lot of interesting stories out of Vatican and out of Rome this week. So when we return, we hope to have this conversation with Dr. Jan Benz on the breakdown on authority. Thank you for joining us today on Intersections Crossing Faith, Culture, and Current Events. Stand by. We'll be back with you in a few minutes.
This is Lavinia Spirito for Catholic Way Bible Study. In Mark chapter 4, Jesus crosses the Sea of Galilee with his disciples and quickly falls asleep, even as their boat is amidst a huge, life-threatening storm. The text says that the sea was literally shaking like an earthquake. Imagine the disciples' fear as they awake their master saying, "Master, do you not care that we perish?" Note that they wouldn't have been in this dangerous situation if they had not gotten in the boat to begin with. They are committed, no matter how big the storm. After setting sail in his boat of radical missionary discipleship, it can often seem that God is asleep or uncaring when we are troubled by the storms of life. The good news is that he is in fact always there and always ready to calm the storm when the time is right. Sometimes the storms are there to show us our total dependence on him and not on ourselves. Jesus, we trust in you.
Catholic Way Bible Study. Peace, power, purpose. Find out more at cwbs.org.
Instead of fighting the crowds, isn't it so much easier to hop online and do your shopping in the comfort of your own home? Did you know that you can help the Guadalupe Radio Network when you shop online? All you need to do is shop on Amazon Smile, and 0.5% of your purchase goes to the GRN. Just go to amazonsmile.com and select La Promesa Foundation as your nonprofit of choice. La Promesa is the parent company of Guadalupe Radio. It's that simple to give a little extra help to the Guadalupe Radio Network.
Thank you, and welcome back to Intersections with Bree and Joey. Joey's off today, but I am honored to be joined by Dr. Jan Benz. Jan was born and raised in Germany. He holds a doctorate in philosophy from Roman you're going to have to help me with that. Roman Athenaeum Regina Apostolorum, and master's in sacred of art, architecture, and liturgy, and a master's in church ecumenicism and religious studies. He is an academic expertise he has an academic expertise, including metaphysics, history of philosophy, and history of art. He teaches philosophy of art for the Catholic University of America and apologetics. And Jan is just an amazing all-around master of many trades. And Jan, thank you today for coming on board so quickly. I contacted you early today to see if you would come on board. Thank you for being here to talk about your recent talk.
Thank you, Bree. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the invitation, obviously also to Guadalupe Radio to host me. So it's always a pleasure to hear from you. So I could not refuse that offer.
Thank you so much. So, for our listeners, we're talking this half hour or 15 minutes rather about culture, and specifically the breakdown of culture and the breakdown of authority. And last hour we were talking a little bit about what was going on in Iraq and some of the institutions that we've been seeing kind of break down more towards a dialogue rather than taking authority. And now I joined you this past week with the Acton Institute, discussing specifically this breakdown of authority. Can you kind of go over your talk a little bit and then really get to that nugget that we discussed offline?
Of course. My pleasure. It's always interesting to have that shift happening from authority to dialogue. And ultimately, a dialogue can always be reduced to individuals. There is no dialogue. A dialogue is a relationship. And so there's no relationship if there's not individuals involved in that. No one can talk to one another if you don't have individuals. So ultimately, a dialogue is only the fruit of an individual being convinced and having an opinion and willing to share that opinion and discuss that opinion. And whatever outcome may be is always dependent on the framework in which that dialogue happens, obviously. So much for dialogue. So to the authority, this is obviously a very important question, and it's very wide spanning of a question. So it touches on many different parts of our lives, and it is something that is ultimately natural, right? When we think of authority, we don't necessarily have positive images. We don't have positive concepts
like
or sentiments connected to it, and especially now our time. What happens often is that authority is spoken badly of. It's spoken about as it's something that we kind of should avoid, right? Which I don't think is actually very fruitful, and it's not very good of a perspective of authority. It kind of mixes up the idea of authority and authoritarian or authoritarianism, which is ideally someone, or not ideally, but it's someone that we imagine as abusing his authority, abusing his power, abusing his position. And so that's why I always like to bring up the Pope as an institution, because the Catholic Church teaches, while the Pope is the highest authority in the Church, it is also the servant of the servants of God. So he has the same authority than Jesus Christ in that sense. And Jesus Christ, as we know, he was the Son of God, therefore had absolute authority. But he also was the servant of his disciples. So my talk, I was invited. It was very, very kind of Michael Severance from the Acton Institute to invite me. I spoke about how authority is natural, how we see it dismantled in our in our society. In our society today. And then I talked a little bit about what the causes of that dismantling of authority are. And there are many, obviously, so I had to make a selection. But what I did basically is I applied it to the modern global kind of economic catastrophe that is already happening, and it's still seeming to get worse. We in Italy, this, we are waiting every day for the new restrictions and looking at what the government published and all of that. And you always need to be up to date. And you always need to check the websites and all of that, and ideally the government website. But I applied it a little bit to this idea that you hear often about, which is called the Great Reset, which is something that
and that's not a new concept. Right. It's not a new concept. And my apologies, because there's a little bit of a delay. But it's not a new concept for a lot of people hear this Great Reset and they think, oh, this is conspiratorial, right? Because it has been associated with individuals who've really pushed out kind of crazy conspiracy theories, like, chips in the new, vaccine and that kind of thing. And yet this is something that has found itself since the early 1920s and 30s at the Frankfurt School. Can you give a little bit of an idea? Because a lot of people might know the Frankfurt School has some disciples that went to like the University of Chicago, and out of the University of Chicago we had Saul Alinsky, and we had Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, who have very much embraced this whole idea of critical theory. So if you can maybe hit that real quick. Real quick.
That's always that's the most difficult thing for a philosopher. You know that. So you put me on the spot here. Very easy. Frankfurt theory is an idea that was mostly developed after the war, where in the university that my mom went to, actually, in Frankfurt. My mom's from Wiesbaden, which is close to Frankfurt. And it's the idea that the 20th century has suffered from authoritarian leaders, and they have fundamentally put a stop to the so-called process of enlightenment that we have seen since, the 18th century. And now that we have an enlightened society, we have people that have access to education and to all kinds of means to make their life better. And obviously also we're post-industrial revolution. There should be no reason for war and for nationalism to rise. And so the Frankfurt School basically builds up what I would call a straw man, and I'm not the only one saying that, that is an authoritarian leader. And so their whole idea is that we need to get rid of that idea of the authoritarian leader. And because of that, we need to ultimately dissolve authority from within. So the Frankfurt School developed a scientific method to do that. Now, philosophically, obviously, this is not something that you experiment in a lab, but this is something that you think about, and you look at history and you analyze philosophy and sociology and all of that. And that theory is called critical theory. And in the US today, you do have a pretty current example, which is the so-called critical race theory. Currently, also, there's a lawsuit going on in Nevada about it, where a young high school student is going to court about this. So you can read all about that in the news. But so that's critical race theory. But critical theory in itself wants to dismantle this idea of an authoritarian leader. What is interesting is that the same people who want to dismantle this problem, this authoritarian leader, whoever they may be today, because they are fundamentally speaking about the nationalisms before the war. So something that at this point is, pretty much almost 100 years old. Not quite, but almost 100 years old.
Yes, but, if I could break in real quick, it's something that I find really fascinating philosophically, and then we see it sociologically, right? Right now is, this whole idea of breaking down the authority and pegging on to people who like authority to these authoritarian ideas. You said, like, you look at Pope the Pope Francis, but the Pope in general, and say he's a servant of servants. This is a kind of philosopher king type idea. The leader is supposed to be serving the people, right? And in the United States, that intent was there by the founders, is that you would go as a public servant to serve the people, and then you'd have a job that what you'd leave behind, and it was an act of service, and you wouldn't supposed to be there forever. You were supposed to spend time in service, but you wouldn't be able to, because financially it wouldn't be feasible for you to raise your family, right? And that has changed. What I find really fascinating is everybody I don't agree with is Hitler. Right, that you've seen that meme is this whole idea that is the epitome. My truth may not be your truth. We're going to break down this authority, and then if we can go and take a look at the result of that, the critical theory in experimental modus right now, is if you take a look at what's going on in, say, Portland, Oregon, where you have a collective of people making decisions. Wait a second, there's still authority there. You still have to break it down even more to say, no one has the right to give me a decision except for my own self-awareness. Am I getting that correctly?
I am, yes, I could not agree more. Ultimately, that is what holds a society together, is the common understanding of the good and the striving to that good. And the authority is there, whatever authority it may be, and I would go out on a limb here to say that this has existed throughout all of history, that that the person in authority has to lead every member of society to that good, to that commonly acknowledged good. And today we see the breakdown of all of that. First of all, the common good is put into question. Second of all, the methods how to reach that good is put into question. Third of all, it's the individuals that are left to themselves, to their own accords, and being abandoned or being ostracized in society. Yes, as you say rightly, not everyone now has a voice to contribute. People are being canceled, right? It's the cancel culture. Be it,
and we're seeing that.
We're seeing this every day. Every day you can just go, and you look at the news, and every day there is some new victim, some new person, be it a book on Amazon, be it Hollywood movie star, be it whatever that is.
But
canceled.
There's still like an authority there, Jan, right? Because you still have a group of individuals coming up and having authority over another person to say. So you're never going to be away from authority.
It's impossible. You cannot get rid of it. It's impossible. It is natural to human beings to have authority present. So there will be someone in charge that dictates, okay, to use that word. There will be someone in charge that decides. There's no question about that. So that is deeply ingrained in human nature, and that is deeply ingrained in what society is. It's a structured organization of individuals under authority, whatever authority it may be.
So with that and understanding that, I find it really fascinating. Towards the end of your talk, you started to talk about movies, which you and I both really love movies a lot. And you were talking about how because of this breakdown, and we see this out of China, this is why I was really interested, because we're going to be talking a little bit about China and what's going on in Hong Kong and Myanmar and now all of these in next segment. But I think what's really fascinating, Jan, is that in China we have dictatorship, right? We have the CCP, but this whole idea came out of the communist, manifesto, breaking down authority, right? Breaking down the fascists, right? And yet we had this dictatorship in China. And what I find really fascinating is that in China, and we know this technologically, those of us who work in the Department of Defense and deal with a lot of this, China steals so much intellectual property because the idea of creativity is not rooted within the structure of China, to the point that even like marriage, and we were talking about that too. You discussed that in your talk, that the authority figure of the father is broken down, and we're seeing that in our society. The whole idea of the man being a strong man. We're going to talk a little bit about Meghan Markle and Prince Harry and what we saw with that this week. This whole idea of breaking down the man and breaking down the authority and taking away this idea of the natural headship actually then takes away the understanding of creativity, right? And if you can maybe, circle, try to talk a little bit about that, because I find that really fascinating.
Even more than that, I think that is fundamentally in China, but also in any other communist regime, or any regime for that matter, what you see is much more basic, not just creativity, it's everything. Is personal freedom, is the right to kind of have a proper fulfillment in the good and to strive for the good. And that's what's so strange, is that those people who want to strive for the good are forbidden to do so. And make this very simple for you. It's in a classic understanding of the nation, the leaders are given the authority, democratically speaking by the vote, but ontologically speaking from God. Whoever is in charge in society, the authority comes from God. And so God grants certain rights, like freedom, like the right to express your opinion, the right to have a family, whatever it may be. That's easy, because no one can take that right away. If God takes it, no one can take it away.
And we actually had that discussion.
Once the rights are given by a party or a group, then those rights can be taken away by that party or that group. The president has given, the president can take. So once you delete God out of the question, it automatically becomes how would I say, like a faulty system.
Right. And we had that conversation, Joey and I have had that conversation before. Where do inalienable rights come from? If God doesn't exist, where do they come from?
Precisely.
From the state. And again, this is we're talking right now with Dr. Jan Benz here in Rome, talking about his recent discussion with the Acton Institute, sponsored by the Acton Institute on authority. And Jan, with this aspect of having inalienable rights, the right to life, the right to pursue land, the right to and pursue happiness too, and being like pursuing your ability to thrive, which is a creative thing. If you take away the idea that you have the right to create, from there you become a cog in the machine, right? So why is it that we are seeing such a targeting, do you think, of like this pendulum that has swung, so to speak, in the United States in particular? Why is the pendulum swinging so much right now in Western society, where this breakdown of authority has taken hold?
I think because the breaking down of authority, whatever its intention it may have originally had, creates a vacuum, and that vacuum needs to be filled. So today, what we're faced with is the vacuum. So the family is broken, the individual is already broken down, the family is broken down, now more and more structures are broken down. With the current restrictions, every social engagement is being broken down. No more parties, no more baptisms, no more birthday parties, no more get-togethers among friends, no more dinners, nothing. So everything is broken down, and so it creates a vacuum of power. And so that vacuum of power needs to be filled. An individual person wants that to be filled because they strive naturally to following someone, and they also need it to be filled because they need to have their economic situation being taken care of. And people who want to grab power, they will take advantage of that. And so what we see now is, again, what we spoke about before, is this idea of the Great Reset. So this idea that someone now will dictate how this renewal of authority will happen. And funny enough, it's exactly the same people who originally wanted to get rid of authority. They want to get rid of authority to create the vacuum that then they can populate.
Right. And that was a question that I had with you, when we were talking at the Acton Institute after your talk. Do you think that this is something that has been acted upon, like with conscious people saying we want to break down authority in order to take authority? I will give an example of this because in the military we call it crisis manipulation. Mm-hmm. Right, where a crisis comes out and you identify a crisis and you can manipulate it in a way that's a manipulation of the good, i.e., explaining to people how we're going to. So originally 15 days to slow the spread was logical. It is part of the military mentality when you have a biological event that we don't know how it's going to affect people. You go to the extreme and then you walk it back to, just to make sure that your hospitals aren't overrun. We saw that happen in Italy, where hospitals were being overrun and they were having to triage people. And then we have to deal with people making decisions who's willing to, who's worthy of living and who's worthy of dying, which was an issue, right? So we saw this aspect of crisis manipulation. So in the last 5 minutes of this conversation, do you think that there were people like, say, Hillary Clinton, who said this would be a terrible crisis to waste? Do you actually think that those people were looking to manipulate a crisis for this purpose, or do you think that they were planning a crisis that they, then imposed upon the world and then they manipulated once the vacuum took place?
Ultimately, it's very hard to bring it down to one cause, honestly, because especially once you deal with political opportunism, it is very hard to actually narrow it down to one cause or narrow it down to an only cause. So right. I wouldn't necessarily try to do that. What we can see is, and this has nothing to do, you mentioned the word before with the conspiracy theory, you just go to the website of the World Economic Forum and they say it. You read the book by Klaus Schwab called COVID-19, and they say it, and it's Great Reset, COVID-19, something like that. I don't know the exact title, but it's very easy to find. You go to all of these sources, and they say it. They say what they want to do, what they want to establish. It's called the Fourth
Right.
Industrial Revolution. It is a weird admixture of transhumanism, the dissolving of private property. It contains a universal wage, like a basic income kind of thing, and the overthinking of our economic structures for the so-called new ecological approach,
Right.
whatever that may manifest in the different countries, because it has a different name in every country, in the US or in Germany or in Italy. It's
Right.
basically the same. So once people, and I think people are not, they're not blind. They see that, they get a sense for it. They say, well, this is all kind of the same. And that's why people start to connect the dots.
Right.
And they start seeing, well, look, these people say they're going to do it, and they're in the action of doing it. So why can we not call them out in that we say they're doing it, you know? So I think you
Yeah,
can just go to
you
the
know,
original source.
that's the CIA and other agencies. They've come out with Operation Paperclip and other documents talking about, you know, the manipulation of press in the past, and so it's not just the CIA. Obviously, other agencies throughout the world have done this, and I think it's important for people to understand that, you know, to weed through a lot of the disinformation about this doesn't mean that you can't find factual data that has to deal with this type of thing, right?
I agree.
And we have to use. Yes.
Let me give you a concrete example. Sorry to interrupt there, but just to maybe close that idea is, and this is maybe a very tangible example. You lived in Rome now for enough time. You've been to the catacombs. You know that the early Christians were apocalyptic. That doesn't mean that they're like, you know, they want the world to end, but they know that the second coming is upon them. They think that all of their life oozes that knowledge. Christ said, "I will come again," and the early Christians who heard it firsthand from the disciples, they still knew that, and they say, "Okay, well, you know, when's the time and the hour? Like, is it tomorrow? You know, but we have to be ready at all times, as the gospel teaches us." So that new second coming is always something new invented by politicians. First, it was the 2 weeks, as you mentioned rightly, as a, you know, rational approach, and that still made sense. Then it was a partial lockdown. Then it was the masks, whatever. Now it's the vaccination, and no matter how you stand to the vaccination, and the fact is that the terminology that is used is actually apocalyptic, meaning that, and this is the German chancellor then, she said, nothing will change until we're all vaccinated. And she actually said, until the whole world is vaccinated. So it's this future point, this apocalyptic expectation, right? To use a theological term, sorry here, the parousia, right? The coming again of that Savior, whatever said. But the Savior is not Jesus Christ. This is not Jesus Christ telling us what's going to happen. This is a politician telling us what is happening. Many of them have financial ties to the very thing that they, you know, apocalyptically pose as what needs to happen to the society. So you're just sitting there and you say, look, this all seems very fishy to me.
Right. And I think, you know, to close, Jan, one of the things that I really appreciate about your talk was that you were using, you know, specific examples like this, logical, reasonable. It's not like having to put jigsaw puzzles together. It literally is one by one. You can, but the real issue with, and this is something that I've been trying to push out, with crisis manipulation or disinformation, for people who are listening right now, when you are reading something, how does it make you feel? Does it make you feel tense or like panic or angry? How is it manipulating your emotions? Because facts, you know, do not manipulate emotions. Facts, reporting, logical and reasonable, it can make you mad, but it doesn't take away your peace. And I think that's something that has to be in, for those of us who are Christians listening, your discernment is really important right now. Do not let yourself be manipulated either on the right or on the left by emotions. Know the person that you disagree with is not Hitler. You know, know that, you know, the world is, you know, lying to you, and you've got to bunker up and, you know, and completely reject everything that's coming out with regards to the vaccine or regards to the virus. all of that's a lie. So just reject all of it. Yeah, and then, things are the means between the extremes, as a philosopher once said, right? The virtue is the means between the extremes. So, Jan, thank you so much for coming on today and discussing this. This is, it's such a pleasure to be able to talk to intellectuals who are really looking at things in a philosophical way, a sociological way, a political way, to say, hey, we need to address these concerns, but in a measured way, and not in a way that is, filled with, what ifs, and manipulating of emotions. So thank you again to Jan Benz. We hope to have you on again with less technical difficulties, so I don't talk over you, but thank you so much for being on.
That's perfectly fine, Bree. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm looking forward to the next time for sure.
And when we're back, we're going to be talking about what's been in the news, in the secular news, including some of the real big news stories coming out of Capitol Hill, Hong Kong, Myanmar, and Prince Harry and Meghan Markle when we return.
Guadalupe Radio Network wants you to know
the desire for God is written in the human heart because man is created by God and for God, and God never ceases to draw man to himself. Only in God will he find the truth and happiness he never stops searching for. Created in God's image and called to know and love him, the person who seeks God discovers certain ways of coming to know him. Our Holy Mother, the Church, holds and teaches that God, the first principle and last end of all things, can be known with certainty from the created world by the natural light of human reason. Without this capacity, man would not be able to welcome God's revelation. Man has the capacity because he is created in the image of God. Paragraphs 27, 31, and 36 in the Catechism.
Read and learn more today in the Catechism of the Catholic Church.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're currently cruising at 39,000 feet. We'll turn that seatbelt sign off for you and let you move about the cabin. Looks like we're about 2 hours and 10 minutes from landing. Plenty of time for you to do some Bible reading.
Wouldn't it be great if everyone read the Bible regularly? Why not start today? A friendly suggestion from Guadalupe Radio Network.
Welcome back to Guadalupe Radio. This is Intersections with Bree and Joey. Joey's off today. I am joined with my producer, Adrian. Hey, Adrian, how are you?
Howdy, howdy. It's good to be here. That was a great guest
and
you
we're
had
talking.
earlier.
Yeah, it was amazing. We had Dr. Jan Benz last hour here from Rome. Jan, his background is amazing. He has a PhD in philosophy, and he is just a man of all trades. And he recently had a talk with the Acton Institute on Authority. What were your thoughts, Adrian, before we go talking about what's been in the news?
Oh my goodness, there was so much going on. I loved it. I think there's so many different threads that could have been like an entire show in and of itself. I especially liked him talking about rights. I think that's such an issue right now we have in America of this false idea of rights where we don't quite understand what a right is, and we kind of think, oh, well, we have a right to health care, we right to this, right to that, right to bear arms, and we fail to understand that the rights that we have that are not natural rights can be taken away from us at any moment just by fiat, and it's quite concerning, to be honest. But I thought it was excellent how he was explaining it, and I think that could be a whole show in and of itself.
100%, Adrian. It's one of the things that Joey and I have had, I would say, about 2 hours worth of a conversation about, breaking down the whole idea of rights and how they are coming, the rights that we have, the inalienable rights, are things that even if someone was to lock you into a dungeon, they still cannot take away your faith. You can give that away, but you cannot have it forced removed, like, say, healthcare,
Right.
One of the things I find really interesting, bringing this all in, is this whole idea of, when we talk about a breakdown on authority and the manipulating of crisis, because, everybody's going to be looking for authority. You can't just stop wanting, we are naturally we end towards the good, as he said, and as Jan said, and we're going to be looking for some type of authority. So if there is a breakdown of that in the family, a breakdown of that in society, what we end up seeing is the manipulation of people's feelings, because people feel like lost. They look for things. And Jan spoke about that too. Even the individual who was one of the founders of this thought out of the Frankfurt School, someone mentioned that some of his disciples, female disciples, were very much feminists. Literally, towards the end of his life, came up to him and literally stripped themselves in front of him and said, "We reject your authority." Right. So even there, they were, burying themselves in some way of saying we're naked in front of you, as showing that we are vulnerable towards some type of authority, but it's not you. Right. And so we're looking for some kind of direction.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
I find that really interesting when you start to think about what else we're seeing in this manipulation. So this past week, I believe it was Wednesday, it could have been Tuesday, there was, it was Wednesday, there was a story that had come out a few months ago from CNN, saying that individuals, a part of the QAnon movement, and for those people who don't know QAnon is a group, a movement that follows an individual who supposedly had Q level access, which is the highest security level access, same as the president. And supposedly this individual was feeding people into what is happening inside the Trump administration, right? And so supposedly some of these individuals who were breaking down what Q would leave as kind of puzzles to be solved, said that the President Trump, was going to take control last week. And because of this report that seems to have absolutely no foundation in any actual fact, CNN reported this, and then CBS picked it up, and other major mainstream media picked it up, to the point that caused such fear at the Capitol that Congress recessed early this past week. And they were claiming that it was due to another attempt of insurrection by, the right, and therefore they had to leave Washington, D.C. And not only that, they themselves are not requesting, but the Capitol Police are requesting for the National Guard to remain in Washington, D.C. And for those people who don't really understand that breakdown of power, when you have something like Title 10, which activates regular duty military to be on American soil, or Title 32, which activates the National Guard in some capacity, those are requests that come from either Congress or the president. So why are the national police asking the Pentagon? So I found all of those things very interesting, because again, it goes back to this authority, this breakdown of authority. Who has authority right now? What are your thoughts on that, Adrian?
Yeah, I had no idea about a lot of what you just said now. I was really surprised. For instance, I didn't know about that's why they were called QAnon. I had never known that. And then also about who is in charge of federalizing the National Guard and having the National Guard in D.C. I had no idea. So that's really fascinating to me. I think that it's really concerning, because I look at it as someone who is disconnected from the military. I'm not well versed in what's going on. It just scares me to see that our nation's capital is it's occupied. It's occupied. It looks as if we're occupied by a foreign nation, but of course it's not. But it looks as if that something that you would see out of a movie, like something out of White House Down or something like that. It's quite terrifying.
It's something that we call psyops in some ways. Now, is there a threat? I'm sure there are threats to Washington, D.C. constantly. And there have been other riots at different capitals throughout the United States as well, where the National Guard has not taken up full-time duty. But one of the real questions are, who has the authority to do this? Why should the National Guard be there? Is it because the National Police don't have the ability to protect, Capitol Hill? Why is it that CNN, then CBS, and all of these other mainstream media were pushing out this narrative that this was going to happen, and that there had to be, more of this protection around Capitol Hill and the White House? The barbed wire and the fences and all of that's called psyops. It's pushing out a narrative of fear and manipulating fear. And if that's all that people are getting, when they watch maybe their hour or half hour of news a day, it really does look apocalyptic. So this goes back to, again, this idea of how the media and how are you receiving your news? Are your news, is the news that you're receiving, is it manipulating your emotions? Are you able to look at it even if you're angry or you find fear in it without losing your peace? Or are you finding yourself on either right or left being very controlled in how you look at things and start to develop a narrative that only the way that you see things are the way that it really is? Because that's where you have to start to say, am I critically thinking at this point? And that goes to what we're seeing right now in Hong Kong and Myanmar. So one of the things that I think is really interesting, a lot of people don't know, is this past week, we saw, or a week and a half ago, we saw 47 pro-democracy leaders arrested. Now, it has come out of Hong Kong. I've not been able to confirm this, Adrian, but the majority of the pro-democracy leaders that helped stage these peaceful protests in Hong Kong, who were lauded on Thanksgiving Day 2 years ago by President Trump for their bravery against dictatorship from coming out of the CCP. All of these people now are incarcerated, and not only that, but Cardinal Zen came out this week and said, "Look, I'm really struggling because no one is there to help us. And I feel like I could, if I've looked to heaven and I've said, allow me to die so I can continue, I can do this work with more power at this point, because all he is doing every day is going to the jails to visit his incarcerated people there." And, Jimmy Lai, who is Catholic, who is the founder of Apple Daily, which is the largest pro-democracy media outlet, he is in jail right now for this purpose. But he's not being abused. At least that's what the reports are. But those students who don't really have a voice reportedly are being abused in Hong Kong. So it's really interesting where we're coming from with regards to what we're seeing in the press in the United States pushing out narratives, and then the press also suppressing narratives such as what's going on in Hong Kong or Myanmar. So out of China this week, because of, I'm not sure if many people know about this, but there have been riots against a coup in Myanmar. Myanmar is also known as Burma at one point. It's a very small country close to China, but they've had to deal with communism, really suppressed. And now the government has, some of the military has taken over this coup. They call it a military junta. And what's really concerning is that this morning I found, Adrian, and you chime in a second, I found an article saying that China is calling for restraint and talks to end the Myanmar crisis. So now we're seeing China taking authority where there has been a stripping of authority. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think I was listening to Fulton Sheen talk about communism the other day, because me and my brother were having a discussion on communism, and I went back and listened to Fulton Sheen's talks on communism. Fulton Sheen is one of the greatest experts on communism today, and it's very apropos to listen to what he has to say about communism, because it applies to China more than ever. Because when he was talking about this, he was speaking about Russia, but the problem is Fulton Sheen was making the point that we cannot judge Russia based off of their foreign policy, because if we judge them off of their foreign policy, as soon as it becomes favorable to us, we now see them as the good guys. And the same thing is happening with China. As soon as we see China as being favorable to the U.S., as having good trade, having good cheap products and things like that, all of a sudden China becomes the good guys. And so Fulton Sheen was making the point, we must understand the foundational issues of communism itself in order that we may continue to condemn communism even whenever it's beneficial to America. And we see this exact issue in China today, where they're benefiting us, and yet our American politicians, all the way up to the President of the United States, are turning a blind eye to the horrific actions going on in China because they are benefiting us financially.
Yeah, and it goes to this whole idea of the Great Reset, right? Again, that just as long as something benefits me, then I'm gonna agree to that authority. But once that authority no longer benefits me, I'm going to go ahead and reject that authority, right? So it's this whole idea of suppression and grinding down of the dignity of the human person. And I'm going to close, Adrian, because this story is one that's really close to home to me, because I've seen this multiple times, both in my personal life, but as well as within other people's lives. A story that has come out in the last 48 hours has been Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, sitting down with Oprah and pretty much spilling the beans on how awful the royal family is and how racist they are. And they're feeding into this, again, this rhetoric that is this breakdown of an authority, even if it's just, this figurehead type family. And we know that there's a lot of issues in that family. But the fact that you've got a woman coming in and marrying this man, and reports coming out of their relationship showing that she really has usurped the headship of this individual. You see it in his body language. You see the abusive language that you see with her, and the manipulation with her. And then you see this isolation of this man from his family, and then this kind of narrative that has developed. And what I think is really interesting is the response that we have seen online, because it's been very polarizing. Certain individuals have looked at Meghan Markle and Harry coming out and saying, "Yes, break off the chains. This it was the right thing to do. The family's horrible. You're pushing this narrative of ecology and all of this, and yet then we see the other side, and individuals saying, "Wow, he looks so unhappy. She has really taken advantage of him." And so I think, to close, Adrian, one of the things that we need to look at in this and in other areas is, what is authority? What are we looking for? How are we being told and informed? How do we inform others? And how do we keep our peace throughout? And I think Dr. Jan Benz made it really clear that if we break down authority, other individuals will take authority. So let's be those servants of the servants of God. And thank you for joining us. This is Intersections. I look forward to seeing you next week when Joey returns. And God bless you, and take care.